The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on a city when most of its people are asleep but danger still lingers in the shadows. A black sedan pulled up along the curb across from a rundown brick building. The headlights dimmed, and the engine cut off with a low hum. Inside the car sat a black man in his late 30s. He wore plain clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, nothing that screamed authority or badge. To the casual eye, he was just another man parked in a bad neighborhood. But his gaze told another story. His eyes never rested, they scanned the building across the street, the windows, the faint movements behind curtains. He wasn't just looking, he was studying. Every flicker of light, every shadow meant something to him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad, scribbling quick notes under the faint glow of the dashboard light. To him, this building was more than bricks and glass, it was a potential crime hub. His instincts, sharpened by years of undercover work, told him something big was brewing here tonight. The street was mostly deserted. A broken street lamp buzzed faintly, casting half the block in darkness. A stray cat darted between trash bins, knocking over a can. The man didn't flinch. His breathing was steady, calm, practiced. He had done this many times before. But peace never lasts long in the city. In the rearview mirror, he caught sight of approaching headlights. A patrol car rolled slowly down the block, its red and blue lights off, but the faint gleam of its spotlight swept lazily across the sidewalks. 2 uniformed police officers sat inside, their faces half lit, half hidden. They weren't just passing by, they had noticed him. The patrol car slowed to a stop right behind his sedan. The officers exchanged a glance before stepping out. Their heavy boots echoed against the concrete as they approached. The black man stiffened slightly but forced his shoulders to relax. He knew this routine all too well. Wrong neighborhood, wrong time, wrong skin color. He told himself to stay calm. He reached for his wallet, ready to identify himself before things escalated. The officers moved in with suspicion carved into their faces. One tapped on the driver's side window with his flashlight. The harsh beam blinded him for a moment. "Evening," the officer said, voice carrying more accusation than courtesy. "What are you doing here?" The man blinked against the light and slowly lowered the window. "Just sitting," he replied calmly, his voice measured. The second officer stepped closer, resting a hand on his holster as if danger might leap out of the car. Their eyes scanned him, the vehicle, the notepad on the dashboard. In that tense moment, the night grew colder. What the officers saw was a black man in a parked car, suspicious by their standards. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that the man they were confronting wasn't a criminal at all. He was an undercover FBI agent. The beam of the officer's flashlight lingered on the man's face as though searching for guilt written across his skin. The black man kept his eyes calm, his breathing steady, but beneath his composure there was a pulse of irritation. He had seen this look before, too many times. The first officer leaned down toward the open window. "License and registration," he demanded flatly, though the car wasn't even running. His tone carried no courtesy, just authority sharpened into suspicion. The man reached slowly for his wallet, his movements deliberate. "I can explain," he began, but the second officer cut him off sharply. "Explain what?" The other officer circled the front of the sedan, flashlight slicing across the windshield, scanning the passenger seat, the dashboard, the floorboards as if hunting for evidence. "You parked out here for a reason. Don't play games with us." The undercover agent's jaw tightened. He was used to tense encounters, but this was different. These weren't criminals or targets, they were supposed to be fellow law enforcers. Still, he knew better than to snap back. A single wrong word could spiral this into something uglier than it already was. "I'm on a job," he said cautiously. The first officer smirked, clearly not believing him. "Yeah. What kind of job puts you in this neighborhood at midnight? Watching houses?" The man's hand hovered near his jacket pocket, where his badge rested inside his wallet. He thought about pulling it out, but the way the officer's hand rested casually, yet tightly, on the butt of his gun made him hesitate. He'd seen enough headlines to know what could happen if a black man reached for something. Instead, he lifted both hands slightly, palms open in a gesture of patience. "Look," he said evenly. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just working." The second officer barked a laugh. "Working? What are you, a lookout? A dealer?" His eyes narrowed with hostility, not curiosity. To him, this man was already guilty, the details just needed filling in. A spark of anger flared in the agent's chest, but he forced it down. Years of FBI training reminded him, control the moment, don't let the moment control you. But it was getting harder. The more they pressed, the more he felt the weight of history, of every black man stopped, questioned, doubted, and dismissed. "You're making a mistake," he said firmly, his voice low but carrying authority. The first officer leaned in closer, sneering. "The only mistake here is yours, buddy. You parked in the wrong place tonight." The silence that followed was thick, electric. The undercover agent could feel the situation tightening around him like a noose. He knew what he had to do, identify himself before things spiraled, but he also knew from the fire in their eyes that they might not care who he was. As the second officer edged toward the passenger side, hand brushing the holster again, the man braced himself. He wasn't afraid of criminals. He wasn't afraid of Dang. The street seemed to shrink as the officers closed in. Their presence was no longer casual patrol, it was confrontation. The undercover agent felt the shift immediately. Every muscle in his body told him this wasn't routine anymore, this was escalation. The first officer's voice hardened. "Step out of the car. Now." The man froze for a half second. He had to weigh the choice carefully. Step out, and the chance of things spiraling increased. Stay in, and they'd drag him out anyway. He glanced at the patrol car behind him, the headlights glaring like unblinking eyes. The alley was silent except for the hum of electricity from a broken lamp overhead. "Officer, please," the agent began, keeping his voice controlled. "I can explain if you let me out of the car," the second officer barked, cutting him off. His hand slapped the roof of the sedan, flashlight still sweeping the interior. The sound echoed down the block, startling a dog into barking somewhere behind the building. The agent inhaled slowly. He opened the door, moving with deliberate slowness so they wouldn't claim he was resisting. His boots hit the pavement, and the cool night air brushed against his skin. His hands remained raised slightly at chest level, a silent shield against misinterpretation. As he stepped into the dim streetlight, the officers flanked him, one on his left, one circling behind. Their body language screamed control, not caution. The second officer's flashlight beam pinned him like a spotlight in an interrogation room. "What's in your pocket?" the first officer demanded, nodding toward the agent's jacket. "My wallet," the man replied evenly. "I can show you." But his words didn't ease their suspicion. If anything, it sharpened. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the second officer snapped, his other hand brushing his holster. "We'll get it." The agent's jaw clenched. His FBI badge, his shield, his protection, was in that wallet. Yet here, in this moment, it was the very thing he couldn't safely reach for. The irony wasn't lost on him, the badge that was supposed to guarantee authority might instead provoke bullets. The first officer leaned in, his face close enough that the agent could see the faint sheen of sweat above his upper lip. "You think you're slick? Parking here, scoping the place. We know this block. You don't belong here." The words cut deeper than the accusation, they weren't about suspicion, they were about identity. To them, his very presence was a crime. The agent kept his voice steady, but steel edged into his tone. "I told you. You're making a mistake. The officers exchanged a look. It wasn't one of reconsideration, it was one of agreement. Decision. Turn around, the second officer ordered, pulling out cuffs. The agent's heart pounded, though his face stayed impassive. He had been trained to face armed gangs, cartels, and terrorists. But right now, it wasn't enemies he was fighting. It was bias in uniform. And as cold steel. The undercover agent's hands hovered in the air, tense but steady. He could hear the faint metallic rattle of the handcuffs as the officer behind him prepared to strike them shut around his wrists. The command still echoed in the night, turn around. He shifted slightly, taking a step toward the curb, his mind racing. Training screamed at him to de-escalate, but instinct reminded him of the danger, the raw, undeniable risk of being a black man reaching for anything in the presence of armed, suspicious cops. I need to reach for my identification, he said firmly, voice low but even, every word enunciated with careful precision. In my inside jacket pocket. That's all. The first officer sneered, suspicion dripping from his tone. Yeah, right. You expect me to believe that? You could be reaching for a weapon. The second officer stepped closer, pressing his flashlight beam directly into the man's eyes. The harsh white light blinded him momentarily, making the night even darker at the edges. Keep your hands up, the officer barked. Don't move unless I tell you. The agent's chest rose and fell steadily, but his pulse was hammering against his ribs. The irony wasn't lost on him, his wallet, holding his FBI badge, was inches away, yet completely unreachable. The very proof that could end this nightmare was locked inside a pocket he dared not touch. I'm telling you the truth, he repeated, his tone controlled but carrying a steel edge. If you let me, I'll show you my ID. But the officers weren't listening. The first officer moved suddenly, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it back toward his spine. Pain shot through the agent's arm, but he didn't resist. He couldn't, not here, not now. Resistance meant danger. Resistance meant headlines with his name in them, written in the past tense. Stop resisting, the officer yelled, though the man wasn't moving. The words were louder than necessary, a performance as much as an order, words meant for any camera, any witness who might appear. The agent gritted his teeth, forcing calm into his voice. I'm not resisting. I'm cooperating. But the second officer stepped forward, hand pressing firmly against his jacket. What's this? He muttered, patting down the pocket where the wallet was. He tensed instantly, as if confirming his own fears. Something's in here. Could be a gun. It's my wallet, the agent snapped, frustration breaking through his composure for the first time. That's it. The officer yanked his hand back as though the word itself was an insult. His partner shoved the agent harder against the hood of the car, the cold metal biting through his jacket. For a brief moment, the agent closed his eyes, gathering himself. This wasn't just another operation gone sideways. This was personal. This was every story he'd heard, every tragedy he'd read, playing out on his own skin. He opened his eyes again, steady and unflinching, even with his cheek pressed against the hood. Your ma. The cold bite of steel tightened around the undercover agent's wrists as the first officer snapped the cuffs shut. The sound was sharp, metallic, final. He stood bent over the hood of his own car, cheek pressed against the freezing metal, the smell of dust and engine oil filling his nose. Stop resisting, the officer shouted again, though the man's body was still, his muscles locked with control. Every fiber in his being wanted to push back, to fight free, but his training told him restraint was the only weapon he had left. From across the street, a faint click broke through the night. Then another. And another. The agent's eyes flicked sideways. On the sidewalk, a young woman had stopped, pulling her phone up to record. Two more pedestrians lingered by the corner store, their faces lit by the glow of their screens as they captured every second. The officers noticed too. Their grip grew harsher, movements exaggerated as though they were putting on a show. "You think we're playing with you," the second officer barked, forcing the agent's arm higher, making him grimace in pain. "You're done. Whatever you're doing here, it's over." The agent's voice was strained but calm. "I told you, I'm working. I'm on a case. You're interfering." But his words bounced off deaf ears. "Case?" the first officer scoffed, laughing harshly. "What are you, some kind of cop? Don't insult us." He pressed his knee into the man's back for emphasis, loud enough for the crowd to hear his dominance. The bystanders murmured, their voices rising like a tide. "He said he's working," someone shouted. Another voice cut through, "Man, let him go. You're gonna regret this." The officers ignored them, but unease flickered across their faces. They weren't in the shadows anymore. Every second of their aggression was being preserved on video, little glowing red dots of record buttons capturing their every move. The agent lifted his head slightly, his cheek scraping against the hood. His eyes locked with one of the bystanders filming, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, holding his phone steady. For a brief instant, the agent felt something like relief. If this spiraled further, at least there would be proof. Still, frustration boiled inside him. He had come here to investigate a criminal syndicate, to gather intelligence that could prevent bloodshed. Now he was the one pinned, treated like prey, while the real threats hid just across the street, unbothered. "Listen to me," the agent said, his voice cutting through the clamor. He twisted his head just enough to project his words. "I am a federal agent. You are making a mistake that will ruin you." The officers stiffened, though they tried to mask it. The words carried too much authority, too much certainty. The crowd caught it too. Whispers spread quickly. "He's a Fed. He just said he's an agent." Phones angled closer. The officers exchanged a glance, a flicker of doubt breaking through their arrogance. But instead of "Rel."